It was exactly 2 in the morning when the crash of a bottle on the kitchen tile jolted me, though, in truth, I had never managed to sleep. At 19 years old, 5 months pregnant and attached to the Army Reserve at Fort Benning, I had learned to rest lightly, listening for danger, but I had never expected the danger to come from my own stepbrother. Tyler stumbled into my room, reeking of liquor, his voice thick with bitterness.
You think you're better than me, soldier girl. You think that baby makes you important.
His shadow stretched across the wall, unsteady but menacing. I barely had time to draw a breath before his foot slammed into my stomach. Pain detonated through me. It was not just my body that screamed. My first thought was the tiny life inside me. I curled instinctively, hands wrapped tight around my belly, praying for a movement, for a sign that the little heartbeat was still there. For a moment, I felt nothing. Cold panic flooded my chest. Was it gone? Was this the moment I lost everything? My knees hit the floor. My head spun. The sound of his laugh grated against the silence like glass on stone. Behind him, my stepmother Linda appeared in the doorway, her arms folded. She did not move to stop him. She only said with a detached hiss, "Keep it down, Sarah, the neighbors will hear." Then she turned away, as if what she had seen were nothing more than spilled milk. I pressed my cheek to the rough carpet arms clamped over my belly, waiting. Then, faintly, a flutter, a soft kick. My baby was still fighting. Relief struck me so hard it brought tears I could not wipe away. But fear followed fast behind. What if the next blow ended it? What if Tyler's drunken rage destroyed the only good thing left in my life? The thought made my pulse race faster than the drills at Fort Benning ever had. I dragged air into my lungs the way my drill sergeant had taught me. 2 counts in hold, 4 counts out. The pain tore at me with every breath, but focusing on the rhythm slowed the spiral of panic. Combat breathing, they called it. In this house, it was survival. Tyler swaggered toward the kitchen, muttering about useless soldiers. His laughter faded with the squeak of the refrigerator door. I pushed myself upright, inch by inch, trembling but determined. The clock on my dresser glowed 2:07 a.m. In 7 minutes, my life had tipped from uneasy silence into something that felt like the edge of death. I wanted to grab my phone from the nightstand to dial 911, but I had learned how quickly Linda smoothed things over. The police came once before and left with nothing more than a warning, but tonight felt different. My baby's faint kick told me I could not stay silent. I reached for the phone anyway. Just as my fingers brushed the case, the device buzzed softly. A single vibration, short and coded from a secure contact I never spoke of in this house. My heart pounded. At the same moment, from far beyond the street, I caught the distant rumble of an engine rolling slow through the night. Not a neighbor's car, not at this hour. Something heavier, closer. The sound faded, then returned steady, deliberate. My chest tightened. I whispered to the baby, "Hold on. We are not alone." I forced myself onto my feet, swaying, one arm clutching my belly, the other gripping the edge of the dresser. The glow of the clock felt like a spotlight on my shame, on my helplessness. But I was not helpless. I was a soldier, and soldiers rise. Linda's slippered steps echoed faintly in the hallway, her muttering voice scolding Tyler for making a mess. Neither of them noticed the engine grow louder outside. Neither of them saw the faint light sweep across the window pane as if the night itself had shifted. I did. And deep inside, I knew that something was about to break. Tonight, the silence would not continue. Tonight, I would not hide in the shadows of their cruelty. Tonight, everything would change. If you have ever faced a night where you knew you could no longer stay silent, tell me in the comments. What would you have done? My earliest memories of home were not filled with warmth. They were filled with tension that clung to the air like humidity in a Georgia summer. My father, David Whitaker, worked construction sites across Atlanta gone before dawn and home after dark, his hands rough and his back bent, but his heart steady. He was the anchor of my life, the one who told me I was stronger than I believed. When he died in a scaffold collapse in 2021, I was 17 and felt like the floor had fallen out from under me. That was the day Linda Mason stepped fully into power. She had been my stepmother for 5 years by then, but with Dad alive, she always played the role of a polite shadow. The moment he was gone, she turned sharp. His life insurance, the house in Columbus, the savings account with my name as a co-beneficiary. All of it was suddenly under her control. She had the papers, she had the charm to convince the lawyer, and she had Tyler, her son, as her excuse. He was older than me by 3 years, already 20 when Dad died, and already spoiled rotten by her protection. Linda used to say with a smile that Tyler was just a late bloomer. What she meant was he was lazy drunk most nights and quick to anger if anyone challenged him. After Dad's funeral, I discovered my name had been quietly erased from account access. Linda told me it was to protect me until I was more mature, but I saw the truth in her eyes. She never planned to give me back what was mine. That house became her throne. Tyler became her soldier. I became the unwanted reminder of a man they no longer needed. I tried to escape by enlisting. The Army Reserve at Fort Benning, now renamed Fort Moore, became my refuge. The discipline, the structure, the relentless push of training gave me something my home never had: respect for effort. When I wore the uniform, no one called me useless. No one reminded me I was not theirs. They called me Private Whitaker. They pushed me hard, but they saw me stand and they acknowledged it. But every weekend, every leave, I was dragged back to Columbus. Linda insisted it was my duty to come home. She controlled the car, the finances, even the bills in my name. When I objected, she reminded me the Army Reserve was part-time. She reminded me she signed the paperwork for my health insurance. She reminded me that family loyalty mattered more than contracts. I would sit in that house under her gaze, my uniform folded neatly in my bag, while she lectured me about respect and obedience. Tyler sprawled on the couch, beer in hand, smirking at my every word. He never missed a chance to call me mascot soldier or parade toy. He would bark fake commands and laugh when Linda joined in. Sometimes he would shove me just to watch me stumble. Linda always looked away. Sometimes she laughed. The house felt like a cage with wallpaper. I held on to the few things Dad left me that Linda had not managed to seize: a silver cross necklace worn from years of his fingers brushing it before work, and a photograph of him holding me on his shoulders at Lake Lanier when I was 6. Those were hidden in my Army duffel. Those were my proof that I had once belonged to someone who loved me. I found out I was pregnant just after my 18th birthday. The father was a fellow reservist who shipped out and never looked back. For a moment, I thought it was a curse. How could I raise a child when I was still struggling to survive myself? But then I felt the first flutter faint, like a whisper under my skin, and I knew this child was not a burden. This child was my line in the sand. Tyler called me stupid the day he found out. Linda said no man would want me now. Their words cut deep, but inside I clung to a truth they could not touch. I was no longer alone. My baby gave me purpose even if they tried to bury it under ridicule. At night in that house, I would lie awake, one hand resting over my growing stomach, listening to the muffled sounds of Tyler shouting at video games, Linda clinking ice into her glass of bourbon, and I would whisper to the life inside me, "We will not break." The only reason I could keep breathing inside that house was because I had a second world waiting for me just a few miles away. At Fort Benning, I was not Sarah the burden or Sarah the orphan. I was Private Whitaker. The cadence of boots on gravel, the sting of sweat in my eyes, the voice of my sergeant cutting through the Georgia heat, all of it reminded me that I belonged somewhere. My friend Rachel Green was the first to notice that I carried myself differently when I returned to base after a weekend at home. She saw the bruises I tried to hide beneath sleeves, the fatigue I could not mask. She never pushed me to talk, but one night after training, she handed me a bottle of water and said quietly, "You do not have to survive this alone." Her words cracked something open. For the first time, I admitted out loud how toxic home had become. Rachel listened without judgment. She did not call me weak. She called me strong for enduring. That was the beginning of me learning to trust again. What Rachel never knew, what no one on base knew, was that I had a secret lifeline outside the reserve. Months earlier, during a leadership seminar at Fort Benning, a senior officer had spoken about resilience. His name was General Marcus Reed. At first, he was just another imposing figure in dress uniform, his stars catching the fluorescent lights. But when he approached me afterward, his questions were not about scores or drills. They were about me. Where do you see yourself, Private Whitaker? What do you want that no one else can take away? He had a way of looking directly into your eyes as if he already knew the answer, but wanted you to claim it. Over time, through secure channels meant for mentorship, those conversations grew into something deeper. He never treated me like a statistic or a broken girl from a broken family. He saw a soldier. He saw a woman with purpose, and slowly he became more than a mentor. He became the one person I trusted enough to imagine a future with. By the time I turned 19, he was my fiancé, though no one in my family knew. I wore the engagement ring on a chain under my uniform tucked close to my skin. At night, when the chaos of home pressed too hard, I would close my fingers around that chain and remember that I had someone in my corner who could not be bought by Linda or mocked by Tyler. Still, weekends at home grew worse as my pregnancy showed. Linda demanded I turn over my Army stipend, claiming she had to manage the bills. Tyler sneered that no commander would want a soldier with a belly. Their cruelty was constant, but it sharpened as they realized I was not shrinking the way they expected. When I refused to hand over my pay, Linda locked me out of the family accounts completely. When I saved what little I could, Tyler stole it. I confronted him once standing in the kitchen with the smell of stale beer and fried chicken grease thick in the air. He laughed, tossed the crumpled bills back at me, and said, "You think that baby is going to save you? No one cares about some soldier girl who could not even finish law school." The words stung, not because they were true, but because they were meant to erase me. Erase everything I had fought for. After that night, I stopped trying to win their approval. I went silent. I learned to answer cruelty with calm, to turn their ridicule into fuel. Every time Tyler shoved me, every time Linda belittled me, I tightened the steel inside my chest. I reminded myself that I was not just fighting for me anymore. I was fighting for the child who would never know my father but would know my strength. I carried that resolve into training. My superiors noticed my discipline. Rachel noticed the fire in my eyes. And Marcus noticed everything. On nights when the weight became unbearable, my phone would vibrate once a coded signal from him, and I knew I could step outside, hear his steady voice, and believe in tomorrow again. By the time winter crept over Columbus and the holiday lights glittered on porches, I understood that my family's cruelty was not just dysfunction. It was control. Linda controlled the money. Tyler controlled the fear. Together, they controlled the house. But what they could not control was my spirit. That was the one thing they underestimated, and that was the one thing that would undo them. The weeks that followed felt like walking across a field already laced with landmines. Every day in that house carried the risk of detonation. Tyler drank more heavily, his temper snapping at the smallest things, and Linda had grown sharper with her words, always reminding me of the debt she claimed I owed. She said the house was hers, the money was hers, and by extension, my future was hers to dictate. I had endured years of their cruelty, but pregnancy had changed the battlefield. Their ridicule had become weaponized. I could not eat a meal without Tyler commenting on my appetite. He would sneer, "Better keep it small, soldier girl. No general wants a fat wife." Linda laughed at that more than once, though she tried to hide it behind the rim of her bourbon glass. They had learned to twist even my pride in serving into something ugly. Mascot Soldier Tyler called me. He said the Army kept me around to polish boots and wave flags, nothing more. Every insult was delivered with the confidence of someone who thought the world belonged to him. But what cut deeper than the words was Linda's silence. When Tyler shoved me against the counter one evening after I told him to back off, she stood in the doorway and said nothing. When I pulled myself up, hand pressed to my stomach, her only remark was, "You bring these things on yourself, Sarah. You should not provoke him." My father's photo still hung in the hallway, his smile frozen in a world before scaffolds collapsed and before love was replaced by control. I often paused there whispering to that photograph in moments of despair. I would ask him if he saw what was happening, if he knew his little girl was being crushed inside the very house he built with his bare hands. I never imagined answers, but the act of speaking gave me a sense of defiance. My baby kicked at night soft nudges that reminded me someone depended on me to fight harder than I ever had. The irony was cruel. On base, I was seen. I had to rank a role, a purpose. At home, I was invisible, stripped down to the girl who had lost her father and had no power to reclaim his legacy. One Saturday morning in late December, Linda gathered me at the kitchen table with a stack of papers. She slid them across the surface, her manicured nails clicking against the wood. "These need your signature," she said. They were bank forms, authorizations, and a transfer of the last account my father had left partially in my name. I pushed them back, my pulse quickening. "He meant for me to have this," I said. "It is all I have left of him." Linda's eyes turned cold. "Do not test me, Sarah. This house is mine. The insurance was mine. You live here because I allow it. Do not make me regret that generosity." Tyler leaned in from the hallway, smirking as if waiting for the show. I shook my head and stood. "I will not sign." Tyler moved fast. He slammed me against the chair, the papers fluttering to the floor. Linda did not stop him. She only snapped, "Enough." Her voice carried not anger for him, but irritation at the noise. That moment seared into me. I realized I would never be safe under their roof. I realized my silence only fed their power. But still, I held my tongue. I kept my expression flat, the way I had learned in training. Never give your enemy the satisfaction of seeing you break. That night, as Tyler stumbled out to another bar and Linda settled into her bourbon haze, I pressed my phone to my chest, whispering into the secure line that connected me to Marcus. His voice came steady and calm. "You are not alone, Sarah. Remember who you are. Remember that nothing they take can erase your strength." I told him I was afraid. Afraid for the baby. Afraid of what Tyler would do if I continued to resist. Marcus did not dismiss my fear. He honored it. But he also reminded me that fear could be channeled. "Use it," he said. "Let it fuel your resolve. You are stronger than their shadows." Those words became my armor. The next morning, I rose early before either of them stirred and ran drills alone in the backyard. The cold Georgia air burned my lungs, but I needed to feel the rhythm of movement to remind myself that I was not powerless. From the upstairs window, I saw Linda watching, her face unreadable. She turned away quickly, but I knew she had seen me. Tyler, however, grew more unpredictable. He began to taunt me in front of neighbors, shouting obscenities across the yard so Mrs. Johnson, the woman who lived next door, could hear. She frowned from her porch, but Linda would wave it off with a practiced smile. "Boys will be boys," she would say. Mrs. Johnson never pushed, but she noticed. I caught her eyes once when Tyler shoved me near the mailbox. Her gaze was full of pity and something else, a quiet promise that she understood. I held on to that, too. Escalation came to a head on New Year's Eve. Linda threw a small gathering for her friends, parading herself as the gracious widow who had carried so much burden. Tyler drank until his words slurred. At midnight, when glasses clinked and music drowned the silence, he cornered me in the kitchen, his breath hot with whiskey. "You are nothing without us," he spat. "You are nothing but a womb renting space in my house." His hand pressed against my shoulder, pinning me to the counter. My stomach pressed hard against the edge. Pain flared, but I kept my voice steady. "Let me go," he sneered. "Or what? You will run to your little army friends. They cannot save you here." His words were wrong. They could save me. And I knew one man who would. I stared into his eyes, not breaking, not crying. I whispered, "You will not break me." The look of confusion that crossed his face gave me a spark of power I had not felt in years. He released me with a shove and staggered back to the party. My hands trembled, my breath came shallow, but inside me a line had been drawn. I would not cross back into silence again. That night, lying awake in my room, the muffled laughter of Linda's guests fading, I placed both hands over my belly. The baby kicked stronger this time, as if reminding me again of what I carried. I whispered, "We will not be their victims. Not anymore." Somewhere outside, far beyond the streetlights, I heard the faint hum of an engine. I did not know then what it meant, but deep down, I felt it. Something was moving toward me, something that would change everything. People often mistake silence for weakness. In my house, silence was the only shield I had. Linda thought it meant submission. Tyler thought it meant fear. But silence, when carried long enough, becomes a weapon sharpened in the dark. That truth became clear in the weeks after New Year's Eve. I moved differently. I answered less, but I listened more. Every insult from Tyler slid off me like rain against stone. Every order from Linda was met with the stillness of someone who had already decided her own course. They did not realize that my silence was not surrender. It was preparation. I had something they did not know about. Someone to be exact. On my chain, tucked beneath my uniform and hidden under plain shirts, was a small silver ring. It was not flashy, just simple and strong like the man who had given it to me. General Marcus Reed was not a man most people could imagine as anyone's fiancé. 4 stars on his shoulder, the weight of command at Fort Bragg, his name carried through every briefing room like thunder. But to me, he was Marcus. The one who called me honey in private when the world pressed too hard. The one who answered at midnight when I thought the baby's kicks were fading and fear gripped me like a vice. He was never allowed to show the world what we were building. Regulations, protocol, public scrutiny. But in the quiet of secure calls, he reminded me that I was more than a victim of my house. I was his equal, his partner, his future. I never told Linda. I never told Tyler. They would have poisoned it. They would have dragged it into their mud. Instead, I held it close like the cross my father once carried. Some nights, after Tyler staggered drunk to his room and Linda sank into her bourbon, I would slip outside into the cold air. The stars above Columbus glimmered, faint, blurred by the city's glow, but still steady. I would touch the chain at my neck, close my eyes, and hear Marcus's voice in memory. Steady, Sarah. You are stronger than their shadows. You are building a new legacy. His words wrapped around me like armor. Rachel, my closest friend in the reserve, noticed that I carried myself differently. During drills, she whispered once, "You look like you have a secret." I smiled faintly and kept moving. She was right. My secret gave me strength. At home, when Linda demanded I sign over the last sliver of my father's assets, I refused. She spat words about ungrateful daughters, about how no man would ever save me. Tyler laughed in the background, raising his beer like a toast. But I did not flinch. I thought of Marcus, of the steady way he looked at me, as if I was more than the girl they tried to erase. And I answered Linda with silence. That silence rattled her more than shouting would have. She slammed her glass down, splintering it against the counter. "You think you are untouchable?" she hissed. I met her gaze. No words, just the quiet of someone who had already chosen not to bow. The more they tried to provoke me, the calmer I became. Inside, though, the fire grew. My baby kicked stronger each day, reminding me I was not carrying silence alone. I began journaling late at night, pages hidden beneath my mattress. I wrote down every insult, every shove, every theft. It was not just for me. It was for evidence. For the day when silence would end. One evening, as rain lashed against the windows and thunder rolled in the distance, my phone vibrated once in my pocket. I slipped away to the bathroom, locked the door, and answered the secure line. Marcus's voice came through low and steady. "I am checking on you." I told him about Tyler's threats, about Linda's pressure, about the papers she tried to force on me. There was a pause on the other end. His voice deepened. "Do not sign anything. Do not let them control you." His certainty filled the hollow parts of me. I whispered that I was afraid for the baby. The silence that followed was brief but heavy. Then he said, "You are not alone, Sarah. Remember that. If anything happens, I will come." His promise was not casual. It was a vow. I hung up and looked at my reflection in the mirror. My eyes no longer looked like those of a frightened girl. They looked like a soldier readying for battle. Days turned into weeks, and still I carried that secret strength. I stopped reacting to Tyler's drunken jabs. When he mocked my uniform, I simply straightened my back and looked at him until he looked away. When Linda lectured about loyalty, I listened, nodded once, and walked out of the room. They could not understand why I no longer bent under their weight. They did not know that behind my silence was the voice of a man who commanded armies and still chose to stand with me. They did not know that the walls of their house no longer held me prisoner. Each night, I counted down to the moment when their cruelty would face light. Each night, I whispered to my unborn child, Soon, we will be free. And somewhere deep inside, I already felt the shift coming. I could not see the future, but I could feel it pressing at the edges of the present like the hum of an engine carried on the wind. My silence was no longer fear. My silence was the sound of thunder waiting to break. The night it finally happened was not marked by any holiday or celebration. It was marked only by the silence of a house that had grown too familiar with cruelty. The clock read just past 2 in the morning. My breath came shallow as I turned on my side, one hand resting on my belly, waiting for the baby to stir. Tyler's footsteps echoed down the hallway, heavy and uneven, a drunk rhythm I had come to dread. He pushed open my door without knocking. His eyes were glassy, his grin cruel.
You think you can ignore us, soldier girl?
He swayed closer, the smell of whiskey rolling off him in waves. Before I could rise, his foot slammed into me again, the blow catching me square in the stomach. Pain burst through me sharper than the first time weeks ago, and for a terrifying second, I felt only stillness inside me. My palms pressed hard against my belly, begging for movement. Come on, baby, come on. Then faint, but real, I felt a flutter. Relief washed over me so fiercely that tears blurred my vision. Tyler laughed a harsh sound that echoed off the walls.
You are nothing, Sarah. Just a womb in my house.
His words cut, but his laugh cut deeper. Linda appeared in the doorway, her robe pulled tight, her face calm as if she had seen this all before. "Keep it down!" she hissed again, the same words she had used the first time. She did not move to stop him. She only turned away. Something in me snapped. I pushed myself up my body, trembling, but my voice steady. "You will not break me," I said. Tyler froze for a moment as if he did not recognize me. Then he sneered and stepped closer, his hand raised as if to strike. But before he could, a sound cut through the night, the low, deliberate rumble of an engine outside. It was steady, powerful, not the stagger of a neighbor's car. Headlights swept across the thin curtains. Tyler's sneer faltered. Linda turned frowning. The engine stopped. The silence that followed was heavier than any words. A knock came at the door, sharp and commanding. Linda hurried to answer, her voice falsely sweet. At this hour, who could possibly? She stopped. The front door opened, and the sound of boots on hardwood filled the house. Heavy, certain, authority in every step. My heart raced not with fear this time, but with something stronger. Recognition. Tyler turned toward the hall, his arrogance draining from his face as a tall figure entered the doorway. General Marcus Reed stepped into the room, his frame filling the space, his uniform immaculate even in the middle of the night. 2 military police officers flanked him, their presence silent but unmistakable. Marcus removed his cap slowly, his eyes fixed on me. "Honey, are you hurt?" His voice was steady calm, but it carried through the room like thunder. Tyler's mouth fell open. Linda's face drained of color. "Honey!" The word hung in the air like a revelation. I pressed my hand against my belly, nodding faintly, unable to speak through the lump in my throat. For the first time in years, I felt safe. Tyler stumbled backward, his voice cracking. "Who the hell are you?" Marcus's gaze did not waver. 4 stars gleamed on his shoulders. He did not need to answer. The silence told the story. Linda tried to recover her voice, trembling. "General, this is a misunderstanding. My stepdaughter exaggerates. She has always been dramatic." Marcus's eyes shifted to her, cold and unyielding. "I saw what I needed to see." Then he turned back to me, his expression softening only for an instant. "You are safe now." Mrs. Johnson, our neighbor, appeared at the open door, her nightgown wrapped tight around her thin frame. She had heard the commotion, and when she saw Marcus standing there, her hand flew to her mouth. She whispered, "My God!" Tyler tried to laugh, but it came out strangled. "So you brought your army boyfriend to scare us?" Marcus stepped forward, his presence filling the room.
"I am not here to scare you,"
he said evenly.
"I am here because this stops tonight."
Linda stammered. "But this is family business." Marcus's voice sharpened. "When a pregnant soldier is assaulted, it is not family business. It is a crime." At his signal, one of the MPs stepped forward, not to arrest, but to record. Body camera light blinked red. Evidence. Authority. Linda's eyes widened as she realized this was no longer contained to her house. Tyler's bravado cracked. He looked at Linda for help, but she had none to give. The rumble of another engine came from outside. This time, it was not military. It was local. Red and blue lights flashed through the curtains. Columbus Police Department had arrived. Mrs. Johnson had called them when she heard my cry. 2 officers stepped inside their uniforms, crisp their expressions professional. General Reed nodded to them with the calm respect of a man who knew his limits. "Officers, you may proceed." Tyler's face went pale. "Wait, this is crazy. She is lying. She always lies." One of the officers stepped forward, voice steady. "Sir, we have a witness. We have video from the body cam, and we have a pregnant victim. You are under arrest for assault and endangerment." Tyler lunged toward me, his desperation flaring, but Marcus moved between us, steady as a wall. Tyler's arms were wrenched behind him, cuffs snapping into place. His shouts filled the hallway as the officers dragged him out. Linda screamed, "Stop! You cannot take my son!" But Marcus faced her with a gaze that silenced her mid-word. "This is beyond me, Mrs. Mason. This is the law." The sound of the handcuffs closing around Tyler's wrists was like the crack of a gavel. For years he had acted untouchable, the spoiled heir to Linda's protection, but now the world tilted. His face twisted with rage as the Columbus officers dragged him toward the front door. His voice rose into a panicked scream. "This is my house. You cannot do this. Tell them, Mom!" Linda followed close behind her robe, trailing across the hardwood, her voice breaking. "Please, please, you cannot arrest him. He did not mean it. He just drinks too much. He loves his sister truly, he does." Her pleas sounded hollow, even to her own ears. Marcus stood tall in the hallway, his arms folded, his presence like iron. He did not shout. He did not need to. Authority radiated from him without effort. Mrs. Johnson stood on the porch, her phone still raised, recording every second. Her voice shook but carried conviction. "I saw it!" He kicked her. He laughed while she cried. The officers gave a curt nod, tightening their grip on Tyler. Outside, the red and blue lights painted the neighborhood in harsh strokes. Curtains twitched as other neighbors peeked out phones, rising whispers carrying in the cool night air. Tyler's struggles grew weaker as reality set in. For once, his arrogance had no audience. Linda turned back to me, her face streaked with tears, her voice cracking into desperation. "Sarah, please, tell them it is not true. Tell them you are fine. You do not want to ruin your family." My hand rested on my belly, the baby shifting as if answering for me. My voice came quiet but clear. "Family does not do this." Linda flinched as though the words struck her harder than any shout. She reached out a trembling hand, but Marcus stepped forward, his arm a quiet barrier. "Enough," he said. The officers guided Tyler into the cruiser, his protests fading as the door slammed shut. The neighborhood had gathered now small clusters of people in pajamas and robes, whispering and pointing. Mrs. Johnson's recording spread among them, her voice narrating in real time. By morning, it would be on every community page in Columbus. By noon, it would be viral. Linda sank to her knees in the doorway, sobbing not for me, not for the baby, but for the collapse of her facade. Her perfect house, her perfect son, her illusion of control had been shattered under the harsh lights of the law. Marcus removed his cap and knelt beside me. His eyes softened, the steel melting just enough for me to see the man beneath the stars. "Honey, you are safe now." I felt my body tremble, the adrenaline draining, leaving only exhaustion. I leaned into him not out of weakness, but because for the first time in years I was allowed to. The officer spoke quietly with Mrs. Johnson, taking her statement. She nodded firmly, her hand steady despite the tremor in her frame. "I will testify," she said. "No one should live through what that girl has endured." I looked at her, my eyes wet, my voice catching. "Thank you." She gave me a faint smile, the kind of smile that told me she had carried her own burdens once and had chosen in this moment to stand with me. Linda finally lifted her head, her eyes red, her voice hoarse. "Please, Marcus, please. He is my son." Marcus's gaze remained steady. "He is also a criminal. That is not for me to decide." That is for the court." His words were final like a verdict. Linda collapsed again, her sobs echoing through the house that had once felt like a prison. But to me, the sound was not sorrow. It was the crumbling of walls. As Tyler's cruiser pulled away, the neighbors' murmurs grew louder. I caught fragments. "Did you hear what he did? She is 5 months pregnant. That man the general called her honey." Phones buzzed, fingers typed furiously the story already spreading beyond the street. I knew what would happen next. The video would reach Facebook groups by dawn. By morning, it would be shared across Georgia. By afternoon, perhaps across the country. The truth that had been silenced in these walls was now unleashed unstoppable. Marcus helped me to my feet, his hand firm around mine. I steadied myself, my other hand resting protectively over my belly. The baby shifted again, strong alive, reminding me of what we had just survived. Marcus looked down at me, his voice low enough for only me to hear. "This is just the beginning. We will see it through." His words carried more than promise. They carried certainty. Outside, as the flashing lights faded into the distance, the night settled again, but it was not the same night. It was the first breath of freedom. I turned back toward the house, the walls that had once mocked me with silence. For the first time, I did not feel small inside them. I felt larger, stronger, untouchable. Linda sat crumpled in the doorway, staring at me with eyes that no longer held contempt, only fear. Fear of what comes when the truth can no longer be hidden. I did not speak to her. I did not need to. My silence was louder than any condemnation. The neighbors continued whispering, some clapping softly, as if justice had already been served. A woman I barely knew from 2 houses down called out, "God bless you, Sarah. You are not alone anymore." Her words carried across the lawn, and I felt them settle into my chest. I was not alone. Not anymore. Marcus guided me gently to his Jeep parked at the curb, the MPs silent behind him. As I settled into the seat, I looked out at the cluster of faces, the glow of phones, the weight of years lifting off my shoulders. Tonight, the silence ended. Tonight, the world began to see. By sunrise, the video was everywhere. Mrs. Johnson's trembling voice narrated over shaky footage, the blue and red lights flashing behind Tyler as the officers dragged him away. Marcus standing tall in the doorway, calling me honey. The caption spread across Facebook first, then bled into Instagram, then TikTok. Pregnant soldier attacked by stepbrother rescued by 4-star general fiancé. My phone vibrated endlessly with notifications, though I had not posted a word. Friends from base texted me screenshots. Rachel called twice before I picked up. Her voice was sharp with fury and soft with worry. "I saw it, Sarah. I saw everything. Are you safe?" I swallowed hard, my voice ragged but steady. "I am safe now." The words felt strange leaving my lips, like they belonged to someone else. But they were true. Safe. For the first time in years. Outside, the neighborhood buzzed with activity. Reporters from Columbus local stations gathered near the street, their vans lined with antennas, cameras pointed at the house that had once felt like my prison. Linda closed the curtains tight, but nothing could block out the whispers. Neighbors walked by, slowly, heads shaking their eyes, flicking between the front door and the lingering stains of flashing lights still burned into memory. By noon, the headline ran across regional news: Columbus woman 5 months pregnant survives assault by stepbrother, high-ranking Army general present. They used my name. My real name. Not erased, not silenced. My stepmother paced the living room, her hands trembling as she clutched her phone. She left voicemails for church friends pleading for support, but the community she had leaned on for years was crumbling around her. At Sunday service, people turned their faces away. Whispers trailed after her robe like smoke. The image of Linda Mason, the respectable widow, had shattered overnight. The court date came quickly. Assault and endangerment of an unborn child carried weight, especially when the evidence was undeniable. Tyler sat shackled at the defense table, his once smug expression replaced by hollow defiance. The courtroom buzzed with cameras and reporters, every seat filled. Mrs. Johnson testified, her voice unwavering as she recounted what she saw. The video played on a screen, Tyler's kick freezing the room into silence. Gasps rippled through the benches. The officers testified next, recounting his resistance, his shouts, his threats. Then I took the stand. My palms sweated against the wood as I placed my hand over my belly and swore to tell the truth. I spoke of years of ridicule of financial control of the night he kicked me while Linda stood by. My voice cracked but did not break. I wanted the court to hear not just what happened but what it meant. That silence had protected my abusers until I chose to break it. Tyler's lawyer tried to twist my words, tried to suggest I exaggerated, but the video cut through every doubt. The baby's survival spoke louder than any defense. When the verdict came, the gavel struck with finality. Guilty. 6 years in prison. Tyler's head dropped as the deputies led him away, his chains rattling like punctuation. Linda sobbed in the front row, her hands clutching a handkerchief, but no one moved to comfort her. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed microphones thrust forward. Reporters asked questions I had no desire to answer. How did it feel to have a 4-star general step in? How long had the abuse gone on? Why had I stayed silent? Marcus shielded me with his presence, his arm steady around my back as we pushed through the crowd. His only comment was simple. Justice has begun. At home, fallout burned deeper. Linda lost her hold on the community. Friends who once smiled at her turned cold. At the grocery store, whispers followed her. At church, no one sat beside her. She tried to spin the story, tried to paint herself as a mother caught between loyalty and truth. But the video told a different story. The court records told a different story. The neighbors who had seen enough told a different story. She could not rewrite this one. Financially, the walls closed in on her too. The court reviewed my father's estate, uncovering the accounts she had hidden from me. With Tyler convicted and Linda's credibility in ruins, the judge restored the assets meant for me. For the first time, my father's legacy was placed back into my hands. The house itself felt changed. The air was lighter, though memories still clung to the walls. Marcus encouraged me to move, but I chose to stay a little longer. I needed to reclaim the space that had been stolen from me. I walked the hallway where my father's photo hung, pressing my hand against the frame. "Dad," I whispered. We made it. The baby kicked strong and steady as if echoing the words. Online, the story gained traction beyond Columbus. Comment sections filled with outrage, support, and debate. Some called me a hero. Some called me reckless for staying in that house so long. Others said Marcus's presence was the only reason justice had come. I read the comments late at night, my hand on my belly, and realized none of them could truly understand. This was not a story about being saved. It was a story about choosing not to disappear, about breaking silence when it mattered most. At base, Rachel wrapped me in a hug the first time she saw me afterward. Her eyes glistened. "You did it, Sarah. You broke the cycle." I hugged her back, whispering, "I could not have done it without you, and I meant it." She had been the one to remind me that silence is not survival. Silence is only waiting. Marcus stood beside me through every step. In court, in the aftermath, in the quiet nights when fear still crept back in, he reminded me of who I was. Not just a victim, not just a soldier, but a woman building a new legacy. The fallout was not just about Tyler's sentence or Linda's shame. It was about reclaiming what had been stolen. My father's name, my child's future, my own voice. The courthouse verdict was only the beginning. Real resolution came slowly, piece by piece, as the dust of chaos settled into something I could finally breathe in. When Tyler was taken away in shackles, I thought the silence would be enough. But silence cannot fill a life. It can only clear the space for something new. Marcus stayed by my side through the days that followed, his presence grounding me when the waves of exhaustion threatened to pull me under. I remember the morning after the sentencing, the way sunlight filtered through the blinds of my father's old house, warmer than it had felt in years. I stood in the kitchen barefoot, one hand on my belly, staring at the chipped tiles where Tyler once laughed after hurting me. This place should have been ruined forever, but instead of pain, I felt a strange stillness, as if the house itself was relieved. Later that week, the legal paperwork arrived. The court had transferred my father's remaining accounts and the deed of the house fully to my name. Linda had contested until the last minute, her voice shrill in hearings, but the evidence was overwhelming. She had siphoned money that was not hers, silenced a child who was not hers, and protected a son who had destroyed what family meant. The judge's gavel cut through all of it. The house was mine. The assets were mine. The past could no longer be rewritten. I sat at the kitchen table with the papers spread out, my hands trembling not from fear but from the weight of justice finally delivered. My father's legacy had come home. The first thing I did was call Rachel. She rushed over that evening, her arms full of takeout containers, her eyes wide with relief. She laughed when I showed her the deed, tears brimming in her eyes. "You did it, Sarah. You won." I smiled through my own tears. We won. Because it had never just been me. It had been the baby kicking when I needed strength, Rachel reminding me that I was not alone, Mrs. Johnson standing up when silence had been the easy choice, and Marcus always steady, always present, reminding me of the future we had promised each other. It was Marcus who suggested we leave Columbus, start fresh, somewhere beyond the whispers and memories. At first, I resisted. I did not want to run. I wanted to reclaim. But then I realized leaving was not running. It was choosing. Choosing where my child would take her first steps, choosing where my voice would rise without being drowned. We married quietly at the chapel on Fort Bragg just months before the baby was due. There was no fanfare, no public spectacle, just vows spoken with steady voices and hands clasped firmly together. Marcus wore his uniform, the stars gleaming, but his eyes never left mine. When he whispered honey as he slid the ring onto my finger, I knew the word no longer carried secrecy. It carried freedom. Our daughter Hope was born in the spring at Womack Army Medical Center. Her first cry filled the room with a sound I had longed to hear, proof that life had survived the storm. When I held her against my chest, tiny and fierce, I whispered the same promise I had whispered for months. "We will not break." Marcus stood beside me, his hand gently on my shoulder, his eyes wet in a way few had ever seen. In that moment, titles meant nothing. He was not a general. I was not a soldier. We were simply parents finally free to begin a life on our own terms. Back in Columbus, the fallout deepened. Linda sold her jewelry to cover debts shunned by the very community she once commanded. At church, her pew sat empty. The whispers never ceased. I saw her once in town, months later, her eyes hollow, her shoulders hunched. She looked at me at Hope in my arms, and she looked away. There was no confrontation, no apology, just silence. And in that silence, I realized I no longer needed her words. Her power over me had dissolved with the strike of a gavel and the first cry of my daughter. The house in Columbus became a refuge rather than a prison. I planted a garden in the backyard, turning soil where once only bitterness had grown. Each sprout that broke through the dirt felt like proof that healing could come even from scarred ground. Neighbors who had once looked away now waved when they passed. Mrs. Johnson brought over casseroles, cooed at Hope, and sometimes just sat with me on the porch, the two of us watching the street that had witnessed everything. Online, the story lived its own life. Articles labeled me the silent soldier. Comment sections debated whether Marcus should have intervened sooner, whether my silence had been strength or weakness. At first, the noise unsettled me. But then I understood. Let them talk. My truth was not theirs to debate. My truth was in the kick of my daughter's legs, in the warmth of Marcus's hand, in the deed with my father's name resting firmly in my drawer. Resolution did not mean forgetting. It meant owning the story. The bruises had faded, but I carried the memory of them like hidden medals, proof of what had been survived. When I stood before cadets at Fort Bragg speaking about resilience in the face of adversity, I did not describe every detail. I did not need to. I simply told them this silence can keep you alive, but one day, breaking silence is the only way to truly live. They listened, eyes wide, pins scratching, but what mattered most was the nods of understanding. They knew. They felt it. That was enough. At night, when Hope slept and the house grew quiet, I sometimes walked the hallway where my father's photo still hung. I would pause, whispering into the silence. "We did it, Dad. We made it through." The photo never answered, but the weight in my chest always lightened. The house no longer felt haunted. It felt claimed, truly mine. After the court doors closed and the verdict was read, I thought the story would end there, but life rarely gives such clean finales. The aftermath unfolded in layers, some loud and public, others quiet and personal. Tyler began his sentence at a medium security prison outside Atlanta. Word spread quickly among the inmates. The man who once strutted through Columbus as if untouchable was now defined by a single act. The whispers carried through the cell blocks. He kicked a pregnant woman. Worse, he kicked a soldier. In prison hierarchy, those sins did not fade. I heard through court updates that he spent his first months in fights, his arrogance colliding with the reality of a world where no one cared about Linda's excuses or his last name. For the first time, Tyler faced consequences without a mother's shield. Linda fared no better. The woman who once controlled rooms with her polished smile became a ghost in her own community. At the grocery store, clerks avoided her eyes. At church, people whispered rather than greeted. Friends she once entertained stopped answering her calls. She tried to move away from Columbus, but reputation traveled faster than relocation. Wherever she went, the story followed. I sometimes wondered if she thought of me when she sat alone at night, her bourbon glass half full, staring at the silence she once demanded of me. But I did not seek her out. Her punishment was not mine to enforce. The world had already done that. For me, aftermath meant rebuilding. At first, it felt overwhelming. Every corner of my father's house carried echoes. The chipped counter where Tyler shoved me. The hallway where Linda stood silent. The bedroom where I once whispered my fears to the ceiling. But slowly, I replaced echoes with new sounds. Hope's laughter in the mornings. Marcus's voice reading bedtime stories when he was home. The hum of a rocking chair on the porch as I watched the seasons change. Rachel became more than a friend. She became family. She visited, often bringing laughter and stories from base, reminding me that my identity was more than survivor, more than mother. I was still a soldier. I still belonged. She held Hope like her own niece, cooing softly, and I watched them together with gratitude that words could not capture. On base, my commanders respected my choice to step back during pregnancy, but they also welcomed me when I returned. Standing in uniform again, my boots hitting the ground in rhythm with others, I felt the weight of survival transform into the strength of belonging. I was no longer the silent soldier. I was a soldier who had spoken, who had survived, who had chosen. Marcus remained steady. His duties as a 4-star general pulled him often, but he never left us behind. When he came home, his presence filled the house with warmth. He held Hope with hands that had once commanded armies, and the sight always brought tears to my eyes. To the world, he was General Reed. To us, he was simply Marcus' father and husband. The media coverage eventually faded, replaced by newer scandals and fresher headlines, but the story lived on in Columbus. Neighbors still stopped me on walks, pressing my hand, thanking me for standing up. Some shared their own stories, whispered confessions of silence they had carried for years. It startled me at first, realizing how many had endured what I had. But then it comforted me. We were not alone. We had simply been quiet too long. I began to speak at small gatherings invited by local women's groups and veteran organizations. Each time I told my story, not with bitterness, but with truth. I did not embellish, did not sanitize. I told them silence had once kept me alive, but nearly cost me everything. I told them breaking silence had saved me, saved my child, and forced the world to see. Every time people listened with rapt attention, and afterward they lined up to tell me their own truths. That was aftermath too, not just rebuilding my life, but helping others find the courage to rebuild theirs. At home, new traditions formed. On Sundays, Rachel joined us for dinner. On evenings when Marcus was away, I read letters he left behind, his handwriting strong and steady, always reminding me that distance did not mean absence. Hope grew quickly, her small fingers gripping mine with fierce determination. She became the symbol of everything aftermath could mean. Pain survived, silence, broken life, renewed. Sometimes late at night, I walked the garden I had planted, the soil soft under my bare feet. The flowers grew in neat rows, but my eyes always drifted to the wild patches where blooms sprouted where they should not have. I loved those most. They reminded me of myself. Growth in unlikely places. Beauty where only scars once were. Linda never apologized. Tyler never wrote from prison. But I realized I did not need their words. Their absence was enough. Their silence was the mirror of the one they once forced on me. Now it belonged to them. In the end, the aftermath was not about revenge or even justice. It was about reclamation, reclaiming my father's name, my daughter's future, my own voice. When people asked how I had survived, I told them the truth. I had not survived alone. Marcus, Rachel, Mrs. Johnson, the baby kicking inside me, they were the threads that wove me back together. And now, every laugh of Hope's, every sunrise on the porch, every salute in uniform was proof that aftermath can be more than recovery. It can be rebirth. When the dust finally settled, when Tyler's sentence was no longer front-page news and Linda's absence from church stopped sparking whispers, I realized I had entered a new chapter of my life. Legacy was no longer just about what my father had left behind in bank accounts and deeds. It was about what I would leave for my daughter, for the community that had watched in silence, and for the soldiers who looked at me and wondered if strength could grow out of trauma. My father's house, once a cage, became the foundation of this legacy. The chipped paint and the warped floorboards no longer whispered of nights filled with fear. They echoed with new sounds, Hope's baby cries, the clatter of her toys on the floor, the soft hum of lullabies I never thought I would sing. Each corner of the house became a monument to survival. In the living room, where Linda once scolded me, I placed a bookshelf filled with volumes my father had loved, marked with notes he scribbled in margins. In the kitchen where Tyler mocked me, I pinned a photo of myself in uniform with Hope in my arms, a silent declaration that this space was mine now. Legacy began with reclaiming spaces, but it grew into something larger. At Fort Benning, I was asked to share my story with younger reserve recruits. At first, I hesitated. I was not sure if I wanted to stand in front of a room full of strangers and reopen wounds that still pulsed. But when I looked at their faces, young, hopeful, some already carrying the weight of struggles at home, I realized silence could no longer serve me. I told them the truth. Not every detail, not every bruise, but enough for them to understand that soldiers fight battles both abroad and at home. I told them that resilience is not about never breaking. It is about breaking and still choosing to stand. When I finished, the room was quiet, not with indifference, but with understanding. One young woman approached me afterward, her eyes wet, her voice trembling. "My stepfather hurts me too. I did not think I could tell anyone." I hugged her, whispering, "You are not alone." In that moment, I saw the beginning of a legacy larger than my own survival. Marcus encouraged this path. Though his duties as a general carried him far, he believed deeply in the power of testimony. He told me once over coffee at our kitchen table, "You survived more than they ever could imagine. If you share it, you give permission for others to fight back." His words rooted deep. I began speaking more often, first to small groups of soldiers, then to community organizations in Columbus. Each time I told my story, I felt the weight of shame lift further, replaced by purpose. Legacy was not about holding on to pain. It was about transforming it into a weapon that cut through silence for others. Hope grew alongside this mission. By the time she turned 2, she was toddling through the halls of the house, her laughter filling corners that once echoed with shouts. Sometimes I caught her small hands tracing the photo of my father in the hallway, her eyes wide as if she somehow knew he had been waiting for her all along. I would scoop her into my arms, whispering, "This was his house, and now it is ours. You will never know it as anything else." Rachel remained constant, almost an aunt to Hope, guiding her with the same steady kindness she had given me during drills. On weekends, she helped me organize small gatherings in the backyard. Women from the neighborhood came, some timid, some bold, but all carrying stories. They sat on folding chairs under the Georgia sun, sipping sweet tea, listening as I read from the journals I once hid under my mattress. I told them silence had protected me, but breaking silence had freed me. One by one, they began to share too. Stories of husbands who bruised them, sons who disrespected them, jobs that crushed them. The garden I had planted became a symbol for them, blooming against odds, roots deep despite storms. Marcus watched from the porch, his eyes soft, his pride quiet but steady. He never interrupted, never tried to command the space. He understood legacy was not built by stars on a shoulder, but by voices rising together. Slowly, people outside Columbus began to notice. Invitations arrived from organizations in Atlanta, from veteran networks across Georgia, asking if I would come speak. Each time I hesitated, Marcus reminded me, "Your voice is not just yours anymore, it belongs to those still trapped." And so I went. Each time I returned home exhausted but alive, filled with the knowledge that my pain had been given purpose. Legacy was no longer a weight I carried, it was a torch I passed. And every time I held Hope close at night, her tiny breaths warm against my neck, I whispered the truth I had learned through fire. What they tried to silence would now echo beyond them forever. By the time Hope turned 4, my story had traveled further than I ever expected. What began as backyard gatherings and bass lectures expanded into auditoriums and conference halls. I found myself standing at podiums beneath bright lights, microphones catching my words, rows of faces leaning forward. Atlanta veterans invited me first, then survivor networks in Savannah, and eventually national organizations. Each time I spoke, the same silence felt the kind of silence I once feared, but now understood as power. The silence meant people were listening, truly listening to a story they had not wanted to imagine. Marcus attended when his duties allowed slipping into back rows, his presence steady but unobtrusive. After one talk in Washington, where hundreds of women stood applauding, he held me afterward and whispered, "You are doing what I never could. You are turning scars into a shield for others." His words meant more than any applause. I balanced this public path with private life, weaving both into a legacy that felt whole. At home in Columbus, the garden flourished, Hope's laughter spilling through the yard as she chased butterflies. I showed her how to plant seeds, her small fingers pressing soil, her eyes wide with wonder. She did not know yet what those flowers represented, but one day she would. I wanted her to grow up believing strength was not something distant or abstract. It was right here in her mother's story, in her own bloodline, in the soil under her feet. Rachel remained a constant force. She joined me at many events, often managing details behind the scenes. She joked that she had become my unofficial bodyguard, but truthfully, she was more like a sister. Sometimes, late at night, after Hope was asleep and Marcus was away on duty, we would sit on the porch and talk about the past. Rachel once said, "You realize, Sarah, you are building something your father would never have dreamed possible. Not just surviving, not just healing, changing lives." Her words stayed with me. They reminded me that legacy was not measured only in what you handed to your children. It was also in the ripples you left in strangers who heard your voice and chose courage because of it. The wider recognition brought challenges too. Media outlets wanted interviews. Some angled for drama, twisting details into spectacle. I learned to guard my words, to remember that legacy was not about feeding curiosity, but about offering truth. When reporters asked how it felt to have a 4-star general for a husband, I smiled but reminded them, that is not the story. The story is about breaking silence, about protecting those who cannot yet protect themselves. Marcus admired that restraint. He told me more than once, "You do not let them turn you into a headline. You stay human. That is why they believe you." Hope grew more aware with each passing year. At 5, she asked why people sometimes stopped me in grocery stores to shake my hand. At 6, she asked why Grandma Linda never visited. I answered carefully with honesty shaped by age. I told her people thanked me because I told the truth when it was hard. I told her Grandma had made choices that hurt people, and sometimes love cannot fix that. She listened with wide eyes, then hugged me tight. It was enough for now. One day when she was older, she would know the full story. For now, I let her childhood remain light. She loved running through the garden painting pictures with Rachel and falling asleep to Marcus's deep voice reading fairy tales. At school, she carried herself with quiet confidence, a reflection of the home we had built. Teachers told me she had a gift for leadership, that other children followed her even when she did not ask them to. I smiled each time, knowing that the legacy had already begun to pass through her. The legal scars lingered too. Tyler remained in prison, his appeals denied. Linda lived on the edges of town, her name now shorthand for betrayal in Columbus gossip. I did not see them often, but every so often I would hear updates. Tyler had been transferred after fights. Linda had sold her jewelry. Each update was like a faint echo from a past I no longer lived in. They no longer had power over me, but their downfall was a reminder of what silence had once cost. In the Army Reserve, my career grew alongside my advocacy. My superiors recognized my resilience not just as personal triumph, but as leadership. I trained younger soldiers, emphasizing not only drills and tactics, but also resilience of spirit. Some nights I stood before a class and told them plainly, discipline is not only about following orders, it is about standing in truth when the world wants you silent. They listened, nodding, and I saw in their eyes the reflection of my younger self, desperate for someone to say those words. Marcus and I learned to balance our lives between duty and family. His responsibilities as a general never ceased, but he carved space for us, for hope, for dinners on the porch, and birthdays filled with laughter. He told me once as we tucked Hope into bed, I have led soldiers across continents, but this is the mission that matters most. That confession from a man who had carried wars on his shoulders told me everything I needed to know about legacy. It was not about rank or medals or money. It was about what remained when the lights dimmed and the world moved on. At night, after Hope slept, I often sat at my desk rereading the journals I once hid under my mattress. The ink still smelled faintly of fear, the words etched in trembling hands. But now reading them, I felt gratitude. They were proof that silence had once protected me, but did not define me. They were proof that legacy can be built on pages written in the dark if you choose to share them in the light. By the time Hope reached 10, the weight of legacy shifted again. She was old enough to read the articles on her own, old enough to recognize my name in headlines or see a clip of me on a stage. One evening, she came to me holding a printed program from a community lecture where I had spoken earlier that week. Her small finger pointed to my picture. "Mama, that's you, right?" she asked. "Why does it say survivor and advocate?" I set aside the dishes I had been drying and sat with her at the kitchen table. I told her gently but directly that sometimes families are not safe and that I had to learn the hard way to stand up for myself. Her brow furrowed. "Like when Uncle Tyler hurt you." The words pierced me because though I had shielded her from many details, children sense truth. I nodded and she leaned into me whispering, "I am glad you are my mama." That simple sentence told me everything I needed to know about the purpose of legacy. It was not only to correct the past, but to give her a future free of its chains. Marcus and I faced transitions of our own. Talk of his retirement circulated, though he remained focused on his command. Over dinners, we spoke of what might come next, teaching writing consulting. He told me more than once, "I want to stand beside you in your work now. You have carried the torch into places I could never reach in uniform." His words carried no regret, only respect. Together, we dreamed of a future where our voices could merge into something greater, a foundation perhaps dedicated to families of soldiers who faced silent battles at home. The idea took shape slowly, born of long nights and quiet planning. Rachel, ever at our side, offered to help with logistics. Mrs. Johnson, though older now and slower on her feet, offered encouragement whenever she visited. You all are building something that will outlast even the strongest stone. She told me once on the porch, her voice rough with age but steady with conviction. Public life grew heavier. More invitations, more panels, more eyes watching. Some nights after returning from events in Washington or New York, I closed the door to my study and sat in the dark, craving only the quiet hum of the Georgia night. The applause was affirming, but the silence afterward mattered more. It reminded me of why I had begun speaking at all. Legacy could not survive on applause. It needed the grounding of authenticity, of truth told without performance. That lesson became clearer when an old video resurfaced online. It showed Marcus entering my house years ago, the night everything changed. His uniform crisp, his voice steady as he called me honey in front of neighbors and police. The clip went viral all over again, dragging old wounds into new conversations. Some praised his presence. Others twisted it into cynicism, suggesting favoritism or theatrics. I braced for anger, but instead found calm. I told Hope, "This is part of our story. We cannot choose how people use it, only how we live beyond it." She nodded, and in that moment, I saw she understood far more than I had at her age. The foundation officially launched the following year. We called it the Hope Whitaker Project after her name and the promise she represented. Its mission was simple: to provide resources for military families facing domestic turmoil, ensuring no one felt silenced or forgotten. The work was exhausting and fulfilling. We traveled, we raised funds, we partnered with counselors and shelters. Each testimony reminded me that legacy is not a monument. It is movement alive and ongoing. Marcus retired with ceremony at Fort Liberty, the band playing the flags, snapping in the wind. During his speech, he surprised everyone by saying, "My proudest title is not general, it is husband and father." The crowd rose in applause, but my eyes blurred with tears. Later, in the quiet of our car, he took my hand and whispered, "Now, Sarah, it is your mission we follow." That partnership, forged in battles both private and public, was the foundation of everything we built. Years passed, and the garden in Columbus grew wild with flowers Hope planted each spring. I sometimes walked through it alone at dusk, touching petals, remembering nights when I doubted we would even survive. Those memories did not haunt me anymore. They steadied me. They reminded me that legacy is built not by forgetting, but by carrying memory with dignity. At 15, Hope asked if she could attend one of my lectures. I hesitated, then agreed. She sat in the front row, her notebook open, her eyes never leaving me. Afterward, she said, "Mama, I want to speak too someday." My heart ached with pride and fear. I told her, "You will when you are ready. For now, just live your story fully. Legacy is not about rushing into the spotlight. It is about being whole when the time comes." She smiled, and I saw the future in her face. One evening, after a long day of planning foundation programs, I sat on the porch with Marcus, watching the sunset bleed across the sky. He said, "Sarah, do you ever feel like we won?" I thought about it. "No," I said quietly. "It is not about winning. It is about ensuring no one else loses the way we almost did." He nodded, and we sat in silence, the cicadas buzzing, Hope's laughter drifting from inside the house. That was legacy. Not applause, not medals, not headlines. Just love surviving. Just truth enduring. When the speeches were over, when the applause had faded, when the foundation settled into daily work and Hope drifted into teenage years, I found myself reflecting more often on what it all truly meant. I used to think strength meant survival, simply getting through another night, another blow, another silence. But with time, I learned survival is only the first step. Legacy begins when survival turns into purpose, when pain is no longer a private burden, but a public light. That realization came one evening in Savannah at a small gathering hosted by a local shelter. After I finished speaking, a woman about my age approached. Her eyes were red, her hands trembling, but she held herself with fierce dignity. She whispered, "I almost left tonight. I almost gave up. But then I heard you, and now I know I am not alone." Her words cracked something inside me. It reminded me of the girl I used to be alone in that Columbus house, praying someone would see me. She had seen me now, and I had seen her. That exchange mattered more than any medal, any headline, any viral clip. It reminded me that legacy is not an audience. Legacy is one life reaching another across silence. Marcus told me once that command is not about the number of soldiers you lead, but about whether one soldier would follow you into darkness. I think the same is true of life. Leadership legacy, whatever word you choose, is not about scale. It is about whether one person feels less alone because of you. That is enough. Still, I cannot ignore how far the story traveled. Sometimes at airports, strangers recognize me. Sometimes at grocery stores, an older man salutes softly, not out of obligation, but recognition. Once at a lecture in Texas, a teenage girl raised her hand and asked, "What gave you the courage to finally speak?" I thought for a long moment before answering. It was not one thing I said. It was the realization that my daughter deserved a mother who chose voice over silence. It was the reminder that silence can protect for a while, but eventually it strangles. I looked at her and added, "The real courage is not mine. It is yours for asking the question at all." The audience clapped softly, and I saw tears in more than one pair of eyes. These moments were heavy, but they were also freeing. They allowed me to turn the darkest night of my life into the kind of story that could guide others out of their own shadows. That is what moral means to me now, not a lesson written in stone, but a torch carried in fragile hands passed from one survivor to another. It is imperfect, sometimes flickering, but always worth carrying. At home, when I watch Hope study late at the kitchen table or hear her humming as she paints in the garden, I know she is already carrying that torch in her own way. She does not have to repeat my story. She will build her own. But she has seen what silence costs and what truth restores. That is enough foundation for any legacy. I sometimes imagine my father watching. I wonder if he would be proud. He never saw me in uniform, never met Marcus, never held Hope. But I believe he would understand. He taught me early that integrity matters more than approval, that work matters more than show. In many ways, I think he prepared me for this without knowing. His absence became part of my strength. His memory is part of my moral compass. And so, when I speak now, whether to soldiers or survivors or simply to my daughter, I always return to the same truth. Silence may shield you for a time, but truth is what sets you free. That truth has cost me, but it has given me more than it ever took away. If you are watching this, if you have listened to my journey from fear to freedom, I want to ask you something. What would you have done in my place at 2 in the morning with no one to protect you, carrying life inside you and the world pressing down? Would you have spoken or stayed silent? Comment below. I want to hear you. Your voice matters here. There are nights when I sit alone on the porch, the Georgia air thick with the sound of cicadas, and I replay everything that has happened. The bruises that once marked my body are long gone, but the memory of them remains etched in my bones. For years, I believed those memories would always feel like chains. Instead, they became keys unlocking doors I never thought I would walk through. I see now that the story was never just about violence or betrayal or even justice. It was about learning that silence is not neutral. Silence always serves someone. In my case, it served Tyler and Linda for far too long. Speaking shattered that arrangement, and though speaking cost me comfort, it gave me freedom. I remember the exact moment I knew my silence had ended forever. It was not when Marcus walked through the door that night, or when the police placed Tyler in handcuffs. It was not even in court when the judge handed down the sentence. It was years later, standing in front of a group of young cadets at Fort Moore, when one of them raised her hand and asked if she could share something private. She told us quietly that she feared going home each weekend because of what waited there. Her voice shook, but she spoke. That was when I realized my legacy was not mine alone anymore. It was multiplying, echoing. Every person who breaks silence becomes a link in a chain of strength. That is what I want you to take from my journey. You do not have to wear a uniform or stand on a stage to change a life. Sometimes all it takes is choosing not to hide anymore, choosing to trust that your story has weight even if others once tried to erase it. If you are listening now and you have carried something in silence, I want to tell you this. You are not invisible. You are not weak. The fact that you are still here proves otherwise. And if you choose to share, you might be the reason someone else finds their way out too. Hope often asks me why I keep telling this story. She knows it by heart now, though I spare her some of the worst edges. I tell her the same thing each time because stories outlive us. Because if I stay quiet, the wrong people keep winning. Because your children and their children deserve a world where truth is louder than lies. She always nods thoughtfully, and sometimes she adds, "I'm glad you didn't stay quiet, Mama." That is enough reason to keep speaking. I do not know what battles you are facing right now. Maybe it is family conflict. Maybe it is control. Maybe it is the kind of violence no one wants to admit. Maybe it is something smaller but still heavy, like feeling overlooked or silenced. Whatever it is, I want you to know that choosing to stand up, choosing to speak, is never wasted. Even if people mock you at first, even if they walk away, even if it feels like no one hears, someone will, and that someone might change because of you. That is the moral I have come to live by. Justice does not always come quickly. Healing does not always come neatly, but truth always finds its voice. My story began with pain, but it did not end there. Yours doesn't have to either. If you felt something as you listened to this anger recognition hope, then I invite you to let me know. Comment below with a single word that describes how my journey made you feel. It matters more than you think. And if you believe like I do that stories like this can help others step out of silence, then please subscribe and share. Because the more voices we gather, the harder it is for injustice to hide. This is not just my story anymore. It can be ours.